Who talks first? You talk first? I talk first.
Hello, everybody. It's a new week. It's Sunday, which means it is time for the Bad Batch reviews right here on Han Talks First. I am Han. I'm your host. It's nice to have you here today. We do shows all the time here on the channel, such as the Loki After Show, the Bad Batch reviews, and also Han Talks First, the Star Wars podcast, every Monday at noon. We do it live on the YouTube and everywhere on the podcast later in the day. So we are now 8 episodes in to the Bad Batch, which means we are halfway through this series so far. It is chugging along, but it is finally getting to a point where the stakes are higher and it's getting more intense. And there's also some special cameos that have just appeared. By the way, if you clicked on this video and you didn't read the title of it, it says spoilers. So if you haven't watched it yet, go away. But for the rest of you, we're going to go ahead and start off by saying the big spoiler of this episode, which was Cad Bane. That's right. We're jumping right into it because this was the most important part about this episode. Cad Bane is a legacy character in the animated world of Star Wars, and seeing him return in the Bad Batch was really special. Not only because people love this character and he's such a very cool like villain, but because the animation style on him in the Bad Batch is at a level that has never been before. And he looked so good. The details in the teeth, the eyes, his face, his breathing mechanism, everything. It was just such a treat to get to see him in this animated form. Really brief synopsis of who Cad Bane is for those of you who aren't familiar, or it's been a while since you've seen him in the past. He was the leading bounty hunter in the era of the Clone Wars after Jango Fett had died. Cad Bane also became a regular presence in the Clone Wars story in the animated show, including one episode where even Obi-Wan Kenobi was disguised and had to work alongside him to be able to gather valuable information for the Republic. And all the while, Cad Bane had this sense of coolness about him. A character like Cad Bane gives a show like The Bad Batch an excuse to be unapologetically dark. He's notorious for having very dark elements about him, always embracing the war elements of the Clone Wars and sparing no expense to make sure that he collects his bounties. So this was a very special treat. I'm so glad he came back into the series. And it also begs a question, will we see him come in other different series going forward? Maybe even live action. I have a theory that he will show up in the Book of Boba Fett. It's not my own theory. A lot of people speculate that he would show up in the Book of Boba Fett because it's a show about bounty hunters. And who better to have in it than a beloved character and beloved bounty hunter such as Cad Bane? I don't know what they would do. I would hope they would do a practical effect for his face and his eyes, but it could be CGI, but regardless, it's going to look amazing. So anyway, the big question about why he's in the Bad Batch is, who hired him? Obviously, it's probably the same person that hired Fennec Shand, who we only can assume to be was the Kaminoans or the Empire, but I strongly speculate that it was the Kaminoans. But was Cad Bane hired at the same time as Fennec Shand, or was he hired after Fennec Shand had so-called failed her attempt at getting her the first time? And the reason why I bring up that question and why I think that's an important question to ask is because it lets the audience know that is there only one bounty hunter after Omega, or are there several? Because if there's more than one, the stakes are even higher. By the way, just so you guys know, and if you like bounty hunters, I am doing a whole episode all about bounty hunters. We're talking about the guild, we're talking about bounties, we're talking about how they're paid, some of their instruments used, and even the training process to become a bounty hunter. That episode is coming real soon, so be sure to stay tuned. We'll be doing that next week on the show. I can't wait for you to see it. Now, everything else in the episode was just kind of, standard. There was nothing really too special about this episode. Of course, it was titled Reunion, meaning that a Bad Batch was going to get together again, including Crosshair, who has been absent for a couple of episodes, unfortunately. And a lot of people have been requesting he come back really soon. But now that we're at the halfway point of the season, we're probably going to see him in every episode going forward, but the stakes are higher than they've ever been. One thing I wanted to point out about Crosshair is, of course, his specific discipline is that he is a good sharpshooter. That's what makes him different from the other members of the Bad Batch and other members of the Clone Army. But in this episode, his vision may have been obstructed after he was shot with that ion engine explosion. So maybe we'll see something go on there where he's not as special as he used to be, and maybe he'll be less of value to the Empire. Maybe he'll be pushed out and he'll have to try and find a way to get back in with the Bad Batch, but they no longer trust him, etc. I think that could lead to an interesting storyline. Now, again, like we talk about on every episode of the Bad Batch reviews, I want to point out the animation. The animation is beautiful, not just the way it moves, but also the coloring, the lighting, the texture on the people's faces. And also, something we didn't mention before is the muscular movement on the characters' faces. It's very well animated and heavily detailed, which I love to see, especially when I'm watching on a very big screen. Another weird question I kind of wanted to think about after watching this episode, because it was mentioned by one of the clones, was that Rex had to go on his own way. And it makes me wonder, well, what is Rex doing that he couldn't help them get off of this planet? You know, Rex, we saw, kind of had a little bit of an attachment towards Omega, and maybe he could have stuck around and helped her train, maybe help get more information about what the Empire is planning to do, since obviously Omega knows more than she leads on. Another very interesting thing that I noticed in this episode that other people aren't talking about is some of the other clone troopers that were with Crosshair when they were going to ambush the Bad Batch was a female. I think female is the incorrect term to use in this situation since we don't know anything about that side character, but it was a D. Bradley Baker voice, so it sounded more like a girl's voice, which was interesting because we were under the impression that Omega was the first of her kind and potentially the first girl as a clone. But like we've been talking about over and over, is we're going to see the de-evolution of clones into the evolution of stormtroopers, and maybe this is the start of that. So maybe these are some mercenaries that came into the army and are just putting on clone trooper armor because they don't have any stormtrooper armor yet. I do also want to point out that that standoff between Cad Bane and Hunter for the life of Omega was probably my favorite part of this episode. Really, it was the best part of this episode. I mean, just the tension alone, and Cad Bane is just so cool, you know? He has his hand on his hip, and Hunter has his hovering right over his blaster, which just goes to show you Cad Bane knows he's going to win. He's done this a million times before. You know, we don't really know anything about Cad Bane's species. At least I don't. So we don't know how old Cad Bane is, but we do know that he's been in this business for a long time, and possibly longer than any clone has. Also, just to mention, recently, every week, I've been talking about my favorite joke per episode, and I have one for this week that actually made me laugh out loud. Again, usually there's one that does it per episode, but this one caught me by surprise, and it was pretty funny. So when they're scaling down the side panels of the ion engine, Omega is walking along, like looking at the grand scale of it, and she's just like, "I've never been in a ion engine before." And then Wrecker is just like, "It would have been weirder if you had." It's the dumbest joke, but it's so funny to me. Okay, and the last thing I'll mention about this episode, which I thought was very interesting, and I could be wrong about this, but I think it was the first time ever we have seen a clone trooper point of view. That, of course, being from Hunter after he was knocked out by the blaster bolt, which I'm a little unclear as to how he survived because it did penetrate his armor. We're not sure if it went through or not, but I'd be curious to see next episode how he gets revived from that. But we got to see his point of view almost like a video game style, which was really cool. And I just like the camera work with it. And it was unique to this show and to anything that I think I've seen before in any of the animated shows. And of course, it gave us a perspective of what they can see through their HUD on their masks, which I just thought was cool. I mean, I'd like to see more of that going forward. But that's my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think, so be sure to leave me a comment or hit me up on social media and tell me your thoughts. And of course, if you want to share any main topics on this channel that you want to talk about with Star Wars, you can at any time go to streamelements.com/HanTalksFirst/tip, where you can tip the show and also send in your questions, and we will use those as main topics on the Han Talks First show, which of course will be coming out tomorrow at noon right here on the YouTube channel and on the podcast, which you can watch live. But all right, everybody, if you're new here, be sure to subscribe to the channel or follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. And we will be back very soon. I hope you all have a great week and are enjoying the Bad Batch. And now, somehow, some way, somewhere this week, may the Force be with you.